Continuing debate of the honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak in support of our party's opposition motion. This is what real climate action looks like. Climate action that doesn't divide people up, but brings people together. Climate action that gives families and individuals struggling to make ends meet a break, while also reducing our carbon emissions, and climate actions that ask the big polluters who have seen record profits to pay for it. We are in the midst of two different crises that must be addressed: a climate crisis and an affordability crisis linked to growing inequality. Last summer and spring, we were confronted directly by the impact of the climate crisis. Record-setting wildfires covered large parts of the country, causing provinces to declare states of emergency and many residents to flee. Smoke blanketed cities across the country, including Winnipeg, where poor air quality kept people indoors and posed a danger to people with pre-existing health issues, including asthma. What we saw over those months was a window into our future if we do not treat this climate crisis with the urgency it deserves. We cannot allow extreme weather events that put people's lives and health at risk to become the new normal. It is not normal. It is a consequence of our failure to act. Meanwhile, a growing affordability crisis is forcing a growing number of people in our communities to choose between groceries and rent, to choose between heating and eating. Grocery prices have soared, far outpacing the general rate of inflation and wage growth. Winnipeg Centre, which has the third highest child poverty rate in this country, food bank use is climbing. In fact, according to a report by Food Banks Canada, food banks in Manitoba have seen a 30% rise in demand. In March of this year alone, there were 57,000 food bank visits, more than 20,000 of whom were children. Life is getting harder and harder for people who are already struggling to get by. But you know who's not struggling, Mr. Speaker? Canada's big oil and gas companies. The top 5 Canadian oil and gas companies reported $38.3 billion in profits for 2022. That's an increase of more than double compared to their profits of $16.9 billion in 2021. Shameful. Suncor alone made over $9 billion in profits during 2022, an astonishing amount, a shameful amount. And where is this money going? Not towards fighting climate change or making life more affordable for people. It's going to reward their shareholders and CEOs. And speaking of CEOs, Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about Imperial Oil. Brad Horson, the CEO of Imperial Oil, is the highest paid executive in the Canadian energy industry. His pay almost doubled in 2022, up from $17.3 million. Imperial Oil is currently under formal federal investigation for a months-long tailing leak at their Kearl oil sands mine in northern Alberta. Documents filed by the company show that they knew that tailings were seeping into groundwater for years before contaminated fluid was reported on the surface. When my constituents miss a shift at work, Mr. Speaker, they get their pay docked and they risk getting fired. When CEOs of Imperial Oil presides over an environmental catastrophe, he gets his pay doubled. It's an insult to hardworking people all over this country whose wages haven't budged for years. And it's just one reason why we need a windfall tax on the excess profits of big oil and gas companies. And why a windfall tax, Mr. Speaker? It's about ensuring that the big polluters who are worsening this climate crisis are paying for the action that is needed to address it. Right now, we know that's not happening. Major loopholes in carbon pricing framework means that oil and gas companies only pay a small fraction of the cost of their pollution, while 80 to 90% of their emissions are exempt. To take one example, Suncor, who I mentioned previously, only pays 1/14 of the full carbon price. 1/14, Mr. Speaker, of the full carbon price. It would also generate significant revenue that we can invest in lowering people's energy bills and a home retrofits that reduce emissions and make life more affordable. How significant, Mr. Speaker? The Parliamentary Budget Office estimates that a windfall tax would generate $4 billion over 5 years. This could fund a program to make heat pumps and other retrofits free of cost to families who would otherwise not be able to afford them. And Mr. Speaker, a windfall tax, we know, is not a radical idea. The European Union, in fact, in the UK and India are among those who have implemented one. Why? Because it's common sense. At a time when energy companies are making record profits and people are struggling to pay their heating bills, we need to turn a portion of those excess profits to relief for consumers. And we can also use revenue from a windfall tax for massive exemption of energy efficient home renovations for low and middle class Canadians. Home retrofits and heating pumps are a win-win-win. They reduce emissions, lower people's utility bills, and create green jobs. And I know in Winnipeg Centre, many people would like to make these changes to their homes, but simply cannot afford the upfront costs. This program should not be restricted to folks who only use a certain type of fuel to heat their homes. Whether you use home heating oil, natural gas, electric baseboard heating, or anything else, you should have access to a program that lets you reduce your carbon footprint and reduces your monthly power bill. It's about how we get to net zero emissions and how we'll bring millions of people along in the fight against the climate emergency. Life is hard enough already, Mr. Speaker, for families and individuals in my riding who are working 3 jobs, skipping meals so their kids can eat. These are not the people who should be paying more to address the climate crisis. It is big oil and gas companies and their CEOs who are fueling this crisis, and we should be sticking them with the bill. We are running out of time, Mr. Speaker, to get this right. Dividing people up by region and putting all the burden onto individuals, as the Liberals are doing, will not get us there. Neither will burying our heads in the sand and refusing to even offer a climate plan, which is the Conservative approach. In fact, the leader of the opposition, the corporate champion from Carleton, is silent when it comes to the obscene profits being made by his oil and gas buddies. And no wonder, because when he was actually sitting at the cabinet table, his government handed out $55 billion in tax cuts to wealthy corporations, including oil and gas companies. It is time for a new approach, one that finally asks the big polluters to pay their fair share of costs, one that gives families and individuals who are struggling a real relief from rising costs that are driving them deeper into poverty and despair, and one that makes energy efficient upgrades available to millions of households that want to do their part for our planet but can't because the costs are too high. Today's motion is exactly that kind of new approach that is desperately needed. And I urge this government and all parties in the House to support it and put us on a path to real climate action that lifts people up and gives them the help they need. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and